I'm currently running a little holiday sale over at my shop with up to 25% on selected products. You will find ornaments, stickers, bookmark, prints, greeting cards, notepads and more. And let's not forget about the very cute 2025 calendars, perfect gift for yourself or any cat lover. The sale will only last until December 3rd, so make sure to check it out. So very recently I found out about these, and no, these are not the Copic alcohol markers, but the brand new Copic Acrea paint markers. I had no idea that Copic had or were even planning to make paint markers, so I was very surprised when I saw these in my feed one day, but I just knew that as the professional art supply tester that I am, I had to try these. I haven't seen anyone use these markers yet, so I'm very curious to see for myself what they will be like. Also, I like to mention I bought these markers myself with my own money, so all I say will be my own and honest opinion as always. So I'm gonna test them, compare them, and also of course make some art. So working with paint markers, are you drawing or are you painting? I'm not sure, but with today's sponsor Craftsy, your online community and resource for all things creative, you can learn both. Craftsy has a ton of in-depth classes on a wide range of subjects like embroidery, woodworking, baking, papercraft, jewelry making, sewing and so on. There's even classes about yoga and fitness. You can connect with fellow makers and DIY enthusiasts to ask questions, share ideas and find inspiration. I found this class by John Chad, Ink Outside the Box, How to Make a Comic Book. I used to do a lot of comics when I was younger, and this class made me really inspired to pick that up again. It had some great tips on lettering, composition and inking. Perfect way to get started. Or if you get a little chilly now in the winter season, there is a bunch of classes on how to knit mittens, both normal size or as cute ornaments. The instructional videos are taught by talented and friendly experts that walks you through each technique with step-by-step demonstrations. If Craftsy sounds like something that you would like to join, then the first 1000 of you to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49, valid for new members only. Thank you so much to Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to the paint markers. The Copic Acrea paint markers comes in this set of 24, which is all the colors available right now. You can also get them individually or in 4 smaller sets of 6 markers. It is actually a little cheaper getting them in the smaller sets, because when you get them in this big set, you're also paying for the case, which to be honest, I am not a big fan of. The case, that is. You can fold it to display the markers, which is nice I suppose, but it is very flimsy and it won't stand upright as it's supposed to. Also, the velcro that keeps it together is very scratchy and keeps sticking to things like my desk mat and my clothes. There is also a risk of the markers falling out of the case when folding it. Other than that, it is nice to have them all collected in one place, I suppose. Here we have the marker itself. It is very slim. It is basically the same size as the Copic Chow markers. It has a clean, minimalistic look and a matte finish, which makes it feel very luxurious. Something I wasn't expecting though when I bought them is the nib. It has a finer plastic nib. I thought it would be more like the Posca pens that has a fiber tip. The Copic Acrea and the Posca M3, which is the smallest size of the fiber tips, should be about the same size, but when comparing them, the Copic Acrea marker looks a lot more like the Posca Extra Fine pen, which also has the plastic nib. You activate the pen by pressing down the nib, and I just pressed it down and held it for a little bit as I usually do with felt tip paint markers, but this activated so fast and created a big blob, so I'm guessing the plastic nibs are a little easier to activate since the paint doesn't have to soak up in the fiber tip, it just flows out directly, so that is something to keep in mind, but first impression, it feels very nice and smooth to draw with. I've gone ahead and removed all the protective plastic that is wrapped around the pens, which was a pain in the butt. I think I struggled for a good 20 minutes trying to remove all the plastic. Then I had very red and sore hands and all of this to deal with. Then I activated them all and I learned from my past mistake and I only gave them a gentle boop, which was just enough to get them running. But after all of that, I could finally start the swatching so we can see what the colors actually look like. The paint should be opaque, so I also made a black line to draw over so we can see the opacity. On the swatch sheet, the markers are divided after each of the 6-pack sets that I mentioned earlier, so you can easier see which color that is included in each set, if that is something that would interest you. So at the very top we have the deep color set, second is vivid color, third is light color, and lastly is essential color set, which has gold and silver in it. And besides the gold and silver, which is very shiny and sparkly, it looks like the markers dries with a semi-matte finish. It looks a little glossy in some angles, but it has a matte finish. Some of them look more opaque than others, but this is only one layer, so I'm sure with a second coat that the black line would just disappear completely on most of them. I also made a smaller swatch card to use later when I'm drawing, and I just wanted them all in color order to get a better overview. I thought it would be fun to compare the Copic Acrea to the Posca paint markers. Posca is, after all, one of the superior paint marker brand out there. I tried picking out matching colors from each brand so you can see them side to side. However, I wasn't sure if I should even include this test at all because some of my Posca pens are very old and are probably not as good as they used to be, so please take this test with a grain of salt. But what was very clear here though in this test is the difference between the nibs. Most of my Posca pens are the fine-tipped M3, which should be about the same size as the Copic Acrea, but it took so much more time and effort to fill in the little square with a Copic plastic tip than the Posca fiber tip. So the last little comparison before jumping into the art. One Copic Acrea paint marker is roughly $5.40. A Posca pen is $4.10. Copic only have 24 colors so far, while Posca, depending on the nib size, has up to 46 colors. But to be fair, Copic Acrea is still brand new. There might be even more colors and nib sizes available in the future. Alright, let's make some art using these Acrea paint markers. Once again, here's Kit, the Explorer Kitty. I'm just really into drawing Kit right now. I've never really had my own original character before, so I'm really enjoying it. In my last video, I drew him in his new winter coat, so I want to make a scene where he's wearing it. It isn't really a snowy winter scene because I wanted to include a lot of colors, but it is like late fall. I wanted to really put these markers to the test, so I tried to incorporate room for a lot of colors, finer details and bigger areas to fill in. So let's get into the coloring, and I will tell you my thoughts about these markers, the pros and cons, and the things that I discovered while I was working with them. I'm using smooth Bristol board to draw on. Paint markers tend to eat the paper and leave these little paper crumbs behind, and I've noticed that smoother, thicker paper with less texture helps a lot. I'm starting with the biggest area to color, the trees, and right away I'm noticing noticing that these markers are not made for coloring larger areas. It was very tedious filling in all the trees. It took a lot of time, and you can't really draw super fast because then the ink flow or paint flow isn't keeping up and the paint turns out a little streaky. But since the nib is finer, the color turns out a little streaky or patchy anyway. At least on these larger areas, it isn't super noticeable in this angle, but in other angles it looks very obvious. But before I continue the review, let's just talk a little about the art itself. I might need to explain it a bit. So this scene takes place in a forest during the night. It is dark, so we have Kit with his lantern. He doesn't have his backpack on, so he has probably put up a camp somewhere and now is out looking around the area, exploring. So the ring around the lantern is where the light is shining, and inside all the colors are brighter. Outside the ring of light, the colors will be darker. I just thought it would create a neat effect and contrast. There will not be any white in this art, so all the birch trees that are usually white with dark stripes are blue outside the light and yellow inside the light. This also goes for Kit, which base color is white. While it's looking kind of cool on the trees, it is a little freaky looking on Kit, especially when the pupils of the eyes are not filled in yet. I have to mention that this art has a very long so-called ugly face, but bear with me, it will all come together eventually. I'm blocking in all the colors and I'm keeping a parchment paper under my hand to avoid smudging the already laid down colors. So I have a few thoughts about these Copic Acrea paint markers. As we have already established, not so great for larger areas. With a finer nib it takes a lot of time and it turns out a little patchy. Also, the barrel of the marker is quite thin, and since you are doing these very dense strokes to fill up the paper, you are gripping the pen a little more firmly than normally, at least I do, so my hand started to cramp up a bit. But on the other hand, no pun intended, the fine nib is amazing for smaller areas and details. If you can fill in one area in one swoop, in one go, before the paint dries, you can avoid the patchy look. I might add that you will still see some pen strokes. It isn't like painting with gouache or anything where you can get these seamless solid colors, but in my opinion, the smaller colored areas looks more even than the bigger ones. The fine nib also works great for line work, as you will see later. The paint flow is pretty good. They do dry up a little faster when coloring larger areas, but with a little shake of the marker I could get the paint flow going again. Also, when it comes to paper tearing and paper crumbs and all of those things when using paint markers, I didn't notice any of that. Perhaps in a few areas where the nib started to run dry and scratch the paper a little extra, there could be some small fuzzies, but as long as you had a good paint flow, you almost didn't have to touch the paper with a nib at all. And I think the plastic nibs are also much more gentle to the paper compared to the more textured and rougher fiber tips on the Poscas, for example. So I didn't experience any frustration with tiny paper crumbs in the paint, so that was a very nice surprise. Also, the paper or the surface that you draw on really matters. Again, I'm using smoother, thicker paper. Now in this art I didn't do any layering of the different colors, but when just drawing on white paper like this, the markers looks very solid and opaque. I made sure to shake them every once in a while to make the paint mix properly, because I noticed that if you don't shake them, the colors might look a little unmixed, like the pigments have separated a bit. But they do look very nice and pigmented, and I think the color variety is quite decent. I had a lot of colors to choose from. Personally, I would have switched the gold and silver markers for another brown color and perhaps a lighter gray, Question for you guys: if you buy a set of regular paints or pencils or whatever medium it is that have metallic colors like gold and silver included, how many of you do actually use these metallic paints or pencils or whatever it is? Or would you also much rather prefer more of the regular colors? Let me know in the comments. So what are my final thoughts on the Copic Acrea paint markers? Overall, I like them. They feel like good quality paint markers. The paint, when drawing on white paper, feels very nice and opaque with pigmented colors. Some of them seemed a little more sheer when doing the test earlier, but it wasn't very noticeable now. I think what it comes down to is what you would like to use these markers for. If you want to use them for adding details or drawing smaller things, or if you want to do line work, this is where the Acrea paint markers could really shine. They were perfect for all the finer details, but if you're looking into coloring bigger illustrations like this, perhaps not. It is working, but there might be some more efficient options out there. I also think they are falling a little bit on the price, and this is just typical Copic. You're paying for the brand, which is fine if that is what you like, but there are cheaper options out there that are equal in quality and with a better color range. Copic Acrea are a little limited in color options, but there might be more colors later along with more nib sizes, we will see. But overall, they are good markers, good quality, and I had a lot of fun working with them. As I mentioned, this art had quite a long, ugly face, and I wasn't sure if it would turn out the way I had imagined, but once I started adding all the details and line work, it all came together. So inside the light circle, I used sepia brown for the line work to create a warmer tone. Outside the light, I used the dark indigo blue for the lines to illustrate the darkness. Since the markers are very smooth to draw with, this part of the process was very fun and relaxing. Also, since there aren't any paper crumbs stuck in the paint, the surface was a lot smoother to draw on, so the lines turned out very even and nice. The only thing is that I had to be very careful to not smudge anything, but thankfully the paint dried quite quickly. So yeah, I am very happy with how this art turned out at the end. I think the lantern light effect added a fun element to the art, and the line work really brought it together. I also managed to squeeze in almost every single one of the colors in the set, besides the white, black and silver and gold. But yeah, I hope you liked the art and the review, that you found it somewhat helpful or interesting. Let me know what you think. Thanks again, Craftsy, for sponsoring today's video, and thank you guys for watching. I will see you next time. Keep drawing my happy cats. Bye!